Good evening. I'm Hope Preston, and I'd like to welcome you to the monthly Washington County Master Gardener meeting. Our presentation today is going to be an introduction to growing berries. But I would like to start with our land acknowledgement, which I think it's a good reminder a few times a year. The Washington County Master Gardener Association acknowledges that the land occupied by our gardens rests on the ancestral lands of the Tualatin Band of Calapooians, who once lived along the Tualatin River before the forced removal from their land prescribed by the Willamette Valley Treaty of 1855. Members of the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde and the Confederated Tribes of Siletz, the Calapooia people, continue to be purposeful stewards of their land by design. They managed a seasonal fire and harvest regimen until the 1840s and are currently involved in efforts to restore native habitat in the Willamette Valley. We seek to educate ourselves about their lifeways and collaborate with them using both traditional and scientific gardening methods. We further express our gratitude to their descendants for carrying on the traditions and culture of their ancestors. We invite everyone to appreciate and reflect on the resilience and healing power of the land and community of their ancestors. And now I would like to introduce Jane Collier, Clackamas County Master Gardener. Jane, I'm very impressed. You've been a Master Gardener since 1996.
Yes, I have.
Basically, when they started, actually, the Master Gardener started in the 1970s, but still, you are well, I don't want to call you a senior member, but you are an established member, right?
That sounds better.
Jane and her husband had a U-pick blueberry patch. So she's actually got commercial experience with berries. And today she and her husband grow and preserve a variety of fruits, berries, and vegetables on their 5-acre farm. So I will turn this over to Jane in a second, but just let me say to anybody who hasn't tuned in before, if you got a question, down at the bottom of your screen, you can see where it says Q&A. Type your question in there, and at the end of the session, when Jane is through with the presentation, we will I will go through the questions and sort them and then turn them over to Jane to answer. So I think that's all we need to say. There also, you might find stuff in the chat if anything comes up that needs to be expressed to everyone, that can be in the chat. And now I will turn it over to Jane.
Okay, thank you very much, Hope. All right, the talk I'm going to give you today is called An Introduction to Growing Berries. And I will have to admit that it's a little intimidating knowing that I'm talking to a group of master gardeners who probably already know most of the things that I'm going to talk about. But we all know that as master gardeners, we often get questions from clients asking us, what type of berries should I be growing? Well, that is not a simple question. So today's talk is meant to give clients, and hopefully some of you master gardeners also, just some information and an overview of 4 of the more popular berries that we have in our area. So let's get started. As soon as I figure out whether my slide will move. There we go. Okay. Now, most of you are probably already familiar with the OSU Extension publications. These 4 publications were written by Bernadine Strict in 2022, before she passed away. Unfortunately, she's no longer with us, but they are excellent, excellent publications. If you haven't read them, you really must. They have a lot of up-to-date, like I said, 2022, very up-to-date information and a lot of useful information also. We also have some 10-minute university handouts and videos that's also available if that's something that you are interested in. So let's start with the objectives. The objectives for today is to choose the type of berry that works best for you and your situation, to learn about the longevity, the spacing requirements, and the proper planting techniques, to find out about the different varieties available and their fruiting season, to learn how to weed, fertilize, and prune, and we'll talk a little bit about some possible pests and diseases. Now, I'm going to start by talking about the longevity of these berries to give you a better idea of the time and effort that it's going to take for the specific berries that you might want to grow. So as you can see, blueberries are the longest living of all of these berries. And in fact, there are many, many blueberry fields out there that are much older than 50 years. You'll also notice that the blackberries seem to live longer than raspberries. And that is mainly because raspberries do have more problems and they are susceptible to Phytophthora root rot, which I'll talk about later, which kills a lot of raspberry plants. And of course, strawberries will need to be replaced every 3 to 5 years. So this longevity for these berries, it's all depending on the presence of the pests or the adverse environmental conditions and any pruning practices. They could last longer, they could last less. Now I'm going to talk about site selection. To grow berries, you need to be sure that they are planted where they will grow the best and give you, the best production and a really good harvest. So let's see what that is. So for blueberries, full sun, of course. All berries really do need full sun. Now, blueberries can tolerate some partial shade, but I will tell you that if you have any shade on your blueberries, they will get a poorer yield and the fruit quality won't be very good at all. So full sun is definitely what you want. They need fertile, well-drained soils, and you're going to hear me say that a lot. And that's what most everything needs is fertile, well-drained soils. They are very sensitive to wet and heavy soils. Now, the most important thing about blueberries is that they have a low pH. They have a lower pH than any of the other berries. It's about 4.5 to 5.5 is the range that we want them in. Our soils in our area most of the time are not that low. Some of you may have soil that's in that range, but most of the time we don't. So you're probably going to have to amend the soil. I will talk a little bit about that later, but in order to reduce the pH, we need to add elemental sulfur. That's what we add to the soil to lower the pH. If you can put your blueberries on raised mounds or raised beds, that will really help with drainage and they will help them a lot. If you have to plant them on flat ground, they'll still work as long as your soil is good and fertile and well drained and all that. Also, try to keep the blueberries away from the tall trees. The roots of those tall trees really do suck up the water and the nutrients from the blueberries, and they're never very happy when they're planted around tall trees. Now, for raspberries and blackberries, once again, full sun for the sweetest berries. And they have a pH of about 5.6 to 6.5, which most of our soils seem to be in that range. So you probably won't have to do too much amendment of the soil if to to change the pH anyway. Once again, there's that fertile, well-drained soils. Raspberries really do need to be planted up on a mound or planted in a raised bed because, like I mentioned, they get Phytophthora root rot, which they're very susceptible to. And research has shown that if you put your raspberries on a mound 18 inches to 2 feet high, you will have about an 80 to 90% less chance of getting Phytophthora root rot. So that's really, really important. Now, blackberries can tolerate a little bit worse soil. They can tolerate more wet and more heavy soils. So if you're trying to decide between raspberries and blackberries and you know your ground is pretty wet in that area, you want to put them into blackberries is probably going to be what you want to do. Also, because they are usually trailing varieties. Most of these are trailing varieties, and they're going to be upright. Really avoid areas with high winds and the cold microclimates. Check your landscape, find out where those microclimates are, and that isn't where you want to be putting your berries. Also, avoid sites where the nightshade plants or strawberries or other cane berries were planted within the last 3 years, because as you know, they get the same sorts of pests and diseases. So you don't want to have a problem, take those out, put another one in, and you're going to end up with the same problem. So be careful where you do plant or replant. Now, you may have noticed that the raspberries, the blackberries, and the strawberries are very similar with the type of site that they need. One thing that strawberries need is they need good air circulation. And if you are in a sensitive area, when you're in an area that is sensitive to winter cold or frost damage, you will need to figure out an area that isn't quite as frost tolerant that is more frost tolerant so that you won't have a problem with your strawberries in case we have an early frost in the spring. I know I'm going a little fast, but I only have 50 minutes and there's a lot of information in here to give to you, but hopefully we'll have time for some questions afterwards. So some of you may have a lot of room to grow berries, but others may not have very much room. So if you're concerned about the amount of space needed to grow your berry crop, the next slice that I'm going to show you is going to give you that information. So for blueberries, we have northern high bush, which is the ones that grow most. Let me start over there. The northern high bush are the best blueberries to grow if you have enough space because they produce a lot more berries and they're larger bushes. If you do grow a northern high bush, you would want one bush in about a 4 square foot area and about 3 to 4 feet apart in a row. Now, half highs is also a type of blueberry that's grown a lot in our area. They're much smaller. They don't produce as much. But if you don't have the room for a high bush, a half high is really a good way to go because you can get by with about 2 to 3 feet in a row. Now, having said that, I will tell you that North Willamette Research Center in their research about blueberries, they tried to get some of them planted closer together and they planted some of their blueberries 2 and 2.5 feet apart and they still had really good yields. So even if you don't have a lot of space, you might be able to squeeze those blueberries in a little tighter than you would think you should. Okay, raspberries and blackberries. Now, if you look at the raspberries, I don't need to read this for you, but if you look at what it says about raspberries, you'll know that there's summer bearing and there's the everbearing, which are also called fall bearing, depending on how you want to say it. And you'll notice one says 2.5 feet apart and one says 2 feet apart. It's not that critical because, as you know, when you plant a raspberry plant in the ground, you are going to be planting one plant. Maybe you plant another one 2.5 feet apart. Well, during this growing season, you're going to get raspberry sprouts coming up everywhere because they grow from the roots. And that's a good thing because those plants are going to be next year's crop. So even though the research shows the best exact time is 2.5 feet or 2 feet apart, it isn't really that critical. And we'll talk a little bit about black raspberries, which are completely different than the summer and the everbearing. Now for blackberries, I hope I said raspberries when I said black raspberries. Anyway, for the blackberries, it says 3 to 5 feet apart. And that also depends on what space you have, because you know that if you plant a blackberry, at least if you plant a trailing or a semi-erect blackberry, they will only grow from the crown. They won't grow from the roots. Now, erect blackberries, which grow completely different than the trailing and the semi-erect, they will grow from a crown and the roots. So even if you do plant those 2.5 to 3 foot apart, it's like the raspberries. They're going to fill in that space during the growing season. Now, June bearers are planted about 15 inches apart in a row about 12 to 18 inches wide. And that's because the June bearers will be putting out runners and making baby plants, and they're going to fill in all that space. Now, the day neutrals in the ground are planted about 1.5 to 2 feet wide in a plant with the plants maybe 12 to 15 inches apart, but they're staggered. So that means they're closer together. And that's because the day neutrals should not put out runners. We don't want them to put out runners. And if they do, we want to cut them off because we want that mother plant to enlarge herself. We don't want her to put out babies because day neutrals are going to be producing berries all season long, all the way from May, probably through October. So we want that mother plant to expand herself and not put out the baby plants. All right. Take a break here. Here's a Trivial Pursuit question answer for you, I guess. About 90% of all the raspberries grown in the US are grown in Oregon, Washington, and California. And 99% of the commercially farmed black raspberries, or we call them black caps, are grown in Oregon. Yay, Oregon, huh? That's pretty neat. All right, now that you've figured out what plant it is that you want to plant, which berry it is, let's see how you're going to go about planting that specific berry. So for blueberries, the most important thing is to test the soil before planting. The pH needs to be low. You're going to probably have to adjust it. And the plants will be happier if you adjust the pH before you plant them in than if you try to adjust it when you are putting them in. Now, to make your soil nice and fertile and fluffy, you're going to want to add organic matter, and you're going to want to either add fine bark or sawdust. Do not add compost and do not add manure because they have a high pH and they also have a tendency to have high salt content, and blueberries don't like to have a high salt content. So you're going to dig a hole that's big enough to accommodate the root ball. That makes sense, doesn't it? And then here's one of the important things. You are going to plant at the soil level right where the root meets the trunk, not higher and not lower. So look at your plant, if it's in a container or if it's bare root, plant it right where the root meets the trunk. And then you're going to put a little bit of mulch around the plant. And this is what everybody hates for me to say, but it's so true. When you plant those plants, whether you're planting them in October or you're planting them in spring, the first time they're going to produce, you are going to remove all the flower buds and you're going to remove any berries that happen to be on. You do not want them to produce fruit the first year. Once again, North Willamette Research Center that has done so much research on blueberries and other berries, they really found that the plants that have their flower buds removed the first year grow better and produce better all the following for the rest of their life, actually. So remove those flower buds, even though that's hard to do. All right. You'll notice that we go along, the raspberries and the blackberries also have similar requirements, but there are just a few exceptions. Once again, plant as early as the soil can be worked in the spring. You're going to dig a hole large enough to accommodate the roots. That does make sense. Now, here's something that's different. And that is, you remember when I said the blueberries, you're going to plant it right where the roots meet the cane? Well, for raspberries and blackberries, you want to plant them 1 to 2 inches below where the roots meet the cane. In other words, the cane's going to be a little bit into the soil. So that's a little bit different, isn't it? Now, once again, for strawberries, more than likely, you're going to be planting them in the spring as early as the soil can be worked. And here's where something else that's a little bit different. So look at that picture. A says, you can see A, that's perfect. That's exactly where you want to plant it, right where the crown meets the roots. B is too low, C is too high, and D has the roots bent. Well, strawberries do not like to have their roots bent at all. So if for some reason maybe you have a bare root strawberries, you bought bare root strawberries, and the roots sometimes are really long, and where you're going to plant them isn't long enough or isn't deep enough, don't bend the roots to fit into the hole. Cut the roots off a little bit. Cut the roots so that they go straight into the hole, not bent at all. That's a little bit different, isn't it? All right. Now, how about planting raspberries in containers? The best raspberries to plant in a container are either the everbearing ones, the ones that you prune to produce 2 crops a year. If you're going to have them in a container, they're probably somewhere close to your house, right? Or sitting on your deck. Why would you only want to have 1 flush of raspberries when you can have 2? So the best ones, if you're going to put them in a container, would be to have them in pruned so that they get 2 crops a year. Now you could grow the summer bearing red or yellow raspberries in containers, but like I said, why bother? Okay. The one thing you have to think about if you do plant raspberries in a container is that you need to ensure that the plant doesn't get too large for the container. Remember, it's going to be putting out the next year's canes, and it could get a little thick. So you might have to do a little bit of thinning on that. So a 20 to 30 gallon size is probably about right. And any well draining potting soil will work really good. I think I skipped something here. Just a second. Maybe they didn't. I wonder what happened to that. Well, that's all right. We'll go on. Sorry about that. For some reason, I'm missing my blackberries and my strawberries. I know they were earlier. Oh, well, I guess I'll have to tell you about that later. Sorry, what happened to my PowerPoint? Okay, well, let's go to blackberries. Blackberries can be put in containers too. Some people are surprised about that. But once again, the best type of blackberries to use for the container are ever-bearing erect cultivars, and they can be pruned to have 2 crops a year. Now, the erect cultivars are different than the trailing trailing raspberry or blackberries because they grow more in a bush shape. So it's kind of easier to put them into. But if you do want a trailing blackberry, like say you want a marionberry or a boysenberry, you can put it in a container. The ones you do not want to put a container are the semi-erect because they're much, much too large and much, much too vigorous. So just stick to a couple of the other kinds. And once again, good, well-drained potting soil will work really well. Now, day neutral strawberries are the best to grow in containers. Why would you want to have summer bearing when you only get one crop? You might as well plant day neutrals and then you can have a crop all the way from May clear through October. I was eating some of my day neutral strawberries just 2 weeks ago until the deer came in and decided they liked them too. So whatever you do, make sure that you don't use regular garden soil. It's too heavy, not enough air circulation. So you need a nice, well-drained potting soil. About 4 plants in a 12-inch diameter container will work really well for strawberries in containers. Now, I just do not know what happened to my blueberry one. Oh, well, I'm sorry. You're all sitting at home and I'm going, what happened to that? Okay, here's another interesting fact. Give your brain a rest here, or give my mouth a rest, maybe. All right. More than half of the blackberries grown in Oregon are the Marion variety, known as Marion berries. I'm sure a lot of you already know this already. And they are the result of crossbreeding between a Chehalem and an Olali blackberry. And the Marion berries were released in 1956 in Marion County. That's why they call them Marion berries. So if any of you happen to live in Marion County, yay for you. All right. You will want to know when your berries are ready to harvest. Okay. If you always take a vacation at a certain time in the summer, you want to make sure that that's not the same time that your berries are ready to eat. Otherwise, whoever's taking care of your house is going to get those berries instead of you. So, we're going to talk about the fruiting season. Now, here is a list of when you can expect these berries to be ready to harvest. And it's nice to know that you also have a choice about the timing of the harvest depending on which varieties you do put in. So blueberries have early, mid, and late season varieties. Depending what variety you have, you could have some that would be as early as June, some that would be maybe in July, and some that might be ripening clear into mid-September. Blackberries, you have some types of blackberries that will be ripening in mid-June and others about early September. And there are so many different types of raspberries also that we have the summer bearing raspberries in June, and then some of them maybe July and August. And if it's an everbearing, you can have raspberries all the way up to frost. Now for strawberries, of course, you know the June bearers are in June. I'm glad they named that, aren't you? And then if you have day neutral strawberries, you can have them from end of May clear through fall. So these are the times. So you have to figure out, when am I going to be gone? And if you're going to be gone, say you want to plant June strawberries, summer bearing with the June ones, and you're going to be gone in June, then I wouldn't plant that kind. I would think of something else to plant. Now, not only are you going to decide which berries you want to grow, but you're also going to have to decide which variety is best for you in your home garden. So let's talk about blueberries first. Northern high bush grow really well in the Pacific Northwest, and they're the ones that are most often grown here because they are the largest. OSU has a really good publication called Blueberry Cultivars for the Pacific Northwest. If you are going to get blueberries or any of these plants, I would really recommend before you go out and buy your plant that you read through these cultivar publications because they give you lots and lots of information. They will tell you about the bush size, the expected yield, the ripening time. They'll tell you how big the berry is going to be, maybe some of the disease resistance, things like that, whether this plant is good for home gardens or whether it's better for commercial. These are just a few of them that are listed in this publication, and this is from earliest to late. Duke is the earliest variety, and Elliott is the latest harvesting ripening variety. Now, half-high blueberries are another type that we see grown a lot in containers, and they're used as ornamentals because they're smaller and they have a really pretty fall color. The cultivar publication that I just talked about will also mention the half highs in there. And you'll notice the names of these blueberries kind of sound cold. North Country, North Sky, Polaris. That's because the half highs are they're more cold tolerant. So if you happen to live in a really high elevation or you're someplace that gets really cold and you really don't think you can do the other berries, half highs would be a good blueberry to try out in your area. And of course, raspberry cultivars for the Pacific Northwest. That's another great publication. I listed just a few of them here that are in this publication. Now, Cascade Bounty and Cascade Harvest are two of the newer varieties that were developed at Oregon State University. And they developed the Cascade series to be tolerant and hopefully some resistant to Phytophthora root rot. Now, Meeker, Willamette, Canby, and Encore are some of the older varieties that aren't as tolerant, but they're still very good and very tasty, and most of them are still available. Now, along with the summer-bearing raspberries, there's also a list of fall-bearing raspberries. There are some yellow ones too. If you want a yellow raspberry, make it a fall-bearing raspberry because they do have a yellow summer-bearing raspberry, but it doesn't taste very good. All the research says they really don't taste very good. So if you want yellow, try a fall-bearing one. Now, there's also, I won't go into this too much. Some of you may have black caps, and if you do, and you say, oh, I wanted her to talk about it, sorry about that, but I don't have a lot of time. And most people don't grow, most homeowners don't seem to grow black caps. They have a very distinct flavor. Either you like them a lot or you can't stand them. So it doesn't seem to be a middle ground. They grow completely different than the regular raspberries because they grow more in a shrub and a vine like this picture shows. And they are needing a lot more summer pruning than our other raspberries. Now, we also have blackberry cultivars for Oregon. And this is a list of the more popular variety of trailing blackberries in the area. And I'm sure you recognize some of these names, the Marion, Obsidian, Thornless Evergreen. Now, Marion Obsidian and the Thornless Evergreen are a cross between a blackberry and a blackberry, but boysenberry, loganberry, and tayberry are a cross between a blackberry and a raspberry. But because when you pick the fruit off of the vine, the receptacle stays in the middle of the fruit, we call it a blackberry. If it came out, we would have to call it a raspberry. So they're all blackberries, even though they're a cross. Now, this is another type of blackberry. I'm going to say blue a lot. Sorry about that. This is another type of blackberry that is getting very, very popular, and that is semi-erect blackberries. They're getting more popular because of the size of the berries. They're huge. Those of you that grow them know they are the biggest berries on that vine. It is amazing. Also, why people really, really like them is because they are thornless. And you know, when you go and you have to work on those vines, sometimes it's not fun when you're going out there and you have all those prickly thorns to deal with. But here's something you really need to know. A couple of years ago, I took a class out at North Willamette Research Center, and it was a berry class. And the gentleman, the agent that was in charge out there that was teaching the class, he was telling us that when they make new blackberries, in other words, when they develop new blackberries without thorns, they have found out that when they remove the thorns, they remove some of the resistance to pests or diseases. So those thorns on the berries are actually helping. So yeah, we'll hope. Just something I thought you should know. Now, once again, we have another type of a blackberry called erect blackberry, and they are also the ones that I show here are thornless varieties, and they also grow more shrub-like. And if you remember some of the earlier slides that I showed you, they grow not just from the crown like the other blackberries, but they also grow from the roots, so they spread out and make a large area of blackberries. And of course, we have a strawberry cultivars for Western Oregon and Washington publication. Again, this is just a small list. And for those of you that are really into strawberries, I think you probably agree with me that Hood strawberries are the best tasting strawberry out there. And you know what? Oh, I'll tell you. I guess I have two more slides before I have to show you something. Um, there is not as many day neutral varieties available for you in the stores. These four seem to be more of them these are the four that we see more often when we go to the nursery or the farm store to purchase them. If you want a specific kind, like say you do want Albion because you know it's a very large strawberry, um, call around first to make sure they have that variety. And don't just go by what the tag, if the tag says day neutral or if the tag says everbearing, everbearing is different than day neutral. Everbearing, believe it or not, only produces 2 crops a year. And we don't see very many of those in the stores anymore, but sometimes they get the day neutral and everbearing mixed up. So make sure if you want a certain type, get the one with that name specifically. I hope that made sense. Here's what I wanted to show you. This is why Hood strawberries are so good because Umpqua ice cream only uses Hood strawberries in their ice cream. Why would they use anything else? And I'm hungry. All right. Now, if you go through all that work to put in these berries, you probably want to know about how many berries you're going to get off of those plants, right? So this slide gives you an idea of what you can expect to harvest from a mature plant. Okay, these are a mature plant that's been growing under the best conditions. All right, so you can read through that. Now, when you get down to blackberries, you notice how it says trailing 10 to 13 pounds per plant, semi-erect 25 pounds per plant. That's because, remember what I said, those semi-erect are huge berries, just huge. I have a friend, I don't have any, I have just Marion berries, but my friend Marie, she has them, and oh my gosh, they are so good and so large. Now, sunshine, of course, is very important when you're growing berries. The more sun, pardon me, the more sun, the sweeter the berries are going to be. Now, if you do not have enough sun to grow berries, then blackberries can tolerate some shade and still taste pretty good. They really do taste pretty good, even though they have a little bit of shade. So if you live in an area that barely gets sun in one area of your yard, but you really, really want to grow some type of berry, try the blackberries, see how that works. All right, now here's a job that most of us are not really fond of, but I'm going to give you a few ideas on how to best deal with them on each specific berry. Okay, for blueberries, mulch is what controls the weeds, and you're going to be using sawdust or bark most of the time. That's what people use, and pulling the weeds by hand. Blueberries have very uh, feathery roots really at the surface of the plant, at the surface. So if you take a tool and you're trying to weed it, you're going to hook all those little berries, excuse me, hook all those little roots on your tool. So that's not a good idea. You're going to ruin them. You're going to ruin the roots. So pulling by hand is very important. And don't use any herbicides, because remember, these are woody plants. So don't use a herbicide that's made for woody plants. Now, using a mulch just as compost for the raspberries and the blackberries works really good. And hand weeding is fine, but you can also use a cultivation tool, especially with your blackberries. Remember, if you're planting trailing or semi-erect blackberries, they're only going to grow from the crown. So that means you're going to have space in between. So yeah, you can take a hoe or a tool and rake up those weeds. But if you're doing it with the raspberries, be very careful because remember, you plant raspberries, but next year's crop is growing all through the season. The next year's, so all those little sprouts coming up are going to be the next season's raspberries. So be very careful that you don't ruin them because you won't have any berries next year if you do. Dense planting of strawberries helps with weeds, but if you plant densely, then you're going to have a little bit of problem with botrytis, that gray mold that we see. So there's kind of a in between. You know, some people plant them really thick so they can avoid weeds, but you have to be very careful that they're not so thick that you're going to not have enough air circulation and you're going to get some diseases in there. Putting straw under them, a lot of people put straw under them. Not only does it keep your strawberries clean, but it does a nice job of controlling the weeds too. But if you have a meadow mice or voles, be very careful if you put down straw because they do like to live underneath the straw. Now, all berries will need some type of fertilizer to produce the best berries. And the following slides, what I mainly want you to realize is how often you need to fertilize. But I'm not going to give you exact details because I really can't do that in this slide. Plus, that information is in those OSU publications. Detailed information on exactly how much fertilizer, what types, everything are in those publications. So that's where I want you to get the information from. So blueberries need to be fertilized 3 times a year. And because they need a low pH, it's more critical that you know what type of fertilizers to use on blueberries. So plus you need to know the amount that you need to use, and that will be in those publications also. Now, one thing I want you to look here for new plants and established plants are the same. You're going to apply 3 times a year, late April, late May, late June, around then. And if you're going to use an organic fertilizer, because organic fertilizers they don't take effect as quickly. They take longer to actually take effect. I did say that, didn't I? You're going to want to use them about a month earlier, maybe even 2 months earlier. So even though it says late April, if you're using organic, use it earlier. And also notice here that all of these that are listed here are only nitrogen fertilizers. Blueberries don't need phosphorus or potassium. They don't need that. All they need is the nitrogen. So whether you're using organic or non-organic, and feather meal and blood meal for organic are the highest nitrogen fertilizers out there that are available to you. Now for your caneberries, you're going to see, you notice the difference here? It's different in the planting year than the established years. And that's what I want you to realize. And when you look through those publications, it hasn't separated too. So you don't get confused. So in the planting year, you're going to have 3 applications, 2 weeks after planting, a month later, a month later. But once they're established, you're only going to have 2 applications. And there's the times that you're going to use them. Once again, organic and inorganic fertilizer are available. So check out those publications. Now, for fertilizing strawberries, this is completely different. For your June bearers in the planting year, you're going to have 3 applications, just like the raspberries and the blackberries, right? But after the planting year, you're only going to fertilize them after the harvest. That's very important. Don't fertilize your June bearers before the harvest after the first year. It's after the harvest. Now, day neutrals, because we want them to put on strawberries all season long, you're going to have to give them a little bit of fertilizer all through the growing season. Now, let's talk about a few problems that you might come up with. But because our time is limited here, I won't be able to go into details about the different problems and how to take care of them. But I mainly want you to be aware that you may end up with some problems that need to be taken care of. And so here we go. Now, here's a few problems that blueberries have. And even though the blueberries do have some of these insect and disease problems, I want you to learn something here. And that is that most of these can be avoided if you have the proper pH. Remember, the pH is low, 4.5 to 5.5. 90% of the blueberry problems are because the pH is too low. Okay, 90%. You don't have to worry too much about bacterial blight. Hopefully, you don't have to worry about the mummyberry. Yeah, I can't do too much for the spotted winged Drosophila and the birds, of course, they're on their own. But 90%. And I don't have problems with my blueberries. I have very, very few problems. I should say very few problems because I really keep track of my pH and I know it's right where it's supposed to be. So that's one of the most important things to remember about blueberries. We already talked about the most destructive problem for raspberries is the root rot problem. Building it up on those 18 or 2-foot high mounds will take care of that, should take care of that problem. Sometimes you have a crown borer problem. That looks like a yellow jacket there, but that is not a yellow jacket. That is a clear wing moth. And those of you that take Margaret's study group, you probably already learned about that clear wing moth there. And there's the little larva here. If your raspberries don't have enough leaves, they may get some sunburn like that. And of course, I'm hoping people don't have a problem with those pesky little fruit flies. Now, I would say my blackberries don't have very many problems either. I do have only Marionberries, which have the biggest thorns on them. And maybe that's why I don't have very many problems with them. But there are some things on the blackberries that I know clients get really worried about. Like, see the spots on that middle picture where it has all those leaf spots on it? People see that and they say, oh no, what's wrong? Well, remember, this usually happens late in the season, and your blackberries, you're going to be cutting out those old canes, and then the new canes are going to be growing. And usually when the new canes come, they look nice and healthy looking. You normally don't get all those problems until late in the season, maybe almost after harvest. So that's not something people have to worry about too much as far as that. Winter cold injury a little bit. They do get some rust, but most of the time it doesn't affect the berries. And the red berry mite, sometimes you have a red berry mite one season and you won't have it the next season. So that's a nice thing. It's nice that some of these pests are just seasonal and they're not year after year after year. And of course, those of you know one of the biggest problem with strawberries probably are slugs. The other one would be the root weevils. And if you don't have enough air circulation, you might get botrytis or gray mold. Now, the picture of that little strawberry in the middle that's kind of misshapen, that's because it got frostbit. It had an early frost came through when that strawberry was developing, and that's why it misshapen a little bit. Okay, I'm I think I might be on time here. This is our last little part we're going to talk about. But one of the concerns of new gardeners, it seems like, is how do I prune my plants? And that is a big question because they're all pruned so differently. So with blueberries, by following these simple rules every year, you have to prune them every year. Your blueberries should produce strong new wood and have a really good fruit production. So in January, somewhere between January and early March, you're going to remove the dead and diseased branches. You do that on everything. That's just common sense, isn't? No matter what you have, you always remove a dead diseased branch. That because if you don't, that's just going to invite more diseases into your plants, no matter what it is. And you're going to remove any weak branches that are shorter than your knees. Okay. That means they grew too late in the season and they're not going to amount to much the following year anyway. Then you're going to want to remove any really spindly branches that are going to touch the ground. When the berries are full and they're going to touch the ground because they're so small and spindly, the bugs are going to get them. You don't want that. So cut those out too. And then you're going to want to cut out one or two of the old unproductive canes. I can tell you that blueberries grow best on 1 to 5 year old wood. Okay. That means we want your blueberry plant to stay 1 to 5 years old its whole life. So that's why you're going to cut out one or two of those old unproductive canes. Then you're going to look at your blueberry plant. I know it's hard to imagine this right now. Here I am talking about it, and you're not looking at a bush, you're not looking at one. So I know it's hard to realize this, but then you'll have a bunch of little tiny, tiny twiggy woods at the top. You're going to cut those off, and then you're going to thin it out. And I have next to show you here. Here is a picture of before pruning and after pruning. Now, some gardeners underprune their bushes because they're really worried that they're going to be removing next year's growth or next year's berries. But you can see how much came out of that little bush. That bush was only about, it had only been in the ground 4 years, I think, maybe 3. This bush belonged to my neighbor. Had already pruned mine when I wanted to take a picture. But you can see how much was pruned out, and it still produced a lot of really good berries that year. Now it's going to be a little more difficult to talk about the different raspberries here. Summer bearing raspberries are really easy to prune. You're going to prune them every year. In late summer, you're going to tear out all those canes, not tear them out, of course. You're going to cut them out. You're going to cut out all those canes that produce the berries. And trust me, you'll know which ones produce berries. It's very obvious. All the new canes, remember, are going to be growing up too, but you're only going to cut out the old ones and maybe thin the field a little bit if it needs to be. And then in March, you're going to top them. You're going to top them to about 6 feet. That will help the laterals grow, which will produce next year's berries. Now for your fall bearing raspberries or ever bearing, whichever you want to call it, I'm only going to talk about having 2 crops a year. If you want to have, if you want to have only 1 crop a year, it's very, very easy. Cut them down in March. They'll grow up through the summer. You'll have berries in the fall. cut them down the next March, they'll grow up in the summer and you'll have only one crop in the fall. If you want 2 crops per year, it's a little more complicated because raspberries put on their first crop in the fall, the top of the plant, and then they put on their second crop the next summer in the middle of the plant. And that's when, after that, that's when you remove the whole plant. You know, we're used to removing plants in the fall, but for your ever-bearing, fall-bearing raspberries, it's opposite. You're going to remove the plant in the middle of summer and not in the middle of fall. Yeah. Okay. Pruning your black raspberries. Once again, they grow differently and they need a lot of summer pruning, so I'm not going to go into too much details about that. Now for trailing raspberries, those also are pretty easy. You're going to have to prune them annually, usually in September, or if you're in a really cold area, you might wait until fall or the middle of winter to do this, or late winter to do this. But what you're going to do is you're going to take out the old canes and attach the new ones to the wires. Pretty simple, isn't it? Especially if you have ones that don't have thorns on them. Now here's just an example of some Marion berries. These happen to be mine. The summer vines, there were all the vines. You can see the ones that are kind of light green. Those are the ones that are growing now, that were growing then, I should say. And they are going to be producing next year's crop. So when these berries were all finished, I cut them down. And you can see by the next picture, I took all the new ones and I trained them to my vines. Now, pruning the semi-erect summer bearing and the erect summer bearing ones are a little bit different. One thing I want to tell you about the semi-erect blackberries is they can grow out of control. They are huge. Sometimes I have seen people who have semi-erect blackberries and the trunk of that blackberry can be 7 to 8 inches around. Humongous. So you're going to have to do a lot of summer pruning because they're going to get out of bounds. And also, if you do some summer pruning and some tip pruning, that will encourage lateral growth so that you can have some berries later in the season. A lot of the semi-erect blackberries are a very late ripening blackberry. I'll let you kind of read through that if you want to. And then again, we have the erect blackberries, and those are the bush type. So once again, this is almost like the fall-bearing raspberries, what I talked about. Just cut them down to the ground in late winter, and then they'll come up and produce one more crop. Cut them down, and they'll come up and produce a nice crop. And strawberries are very easy to take care of. For your June-bearing strawberries, if you want to, you can do what they call renovation in the summer. And after your blueberries, after your strawberries are done, after you've harvested them, you can do like that picture shows, cut off a lot of the leaves of them. Make sure that you don't injure the crown, but just cut off all the leaves. And then what they're going to do is they're going to put out more leaves, and those are going to be nice and healthy. Maybe you'll even put out a few more baby plants, and that will be next year's crop. So that's pretty simple. And in the fall, you just want to rake up and clean up any bad parts of the strawberries. For the day neutral strawberries during the growing season, you want to make sure that you cut off the runners if they happen to grow any. They won't grow too many runners, but some of them will grow runners. Remember, you don't want those baby plants. You want just the mother plant to grow bigger. So all you do is cut off the runners during the growing season, and then all through the year, just remove any dead or damaged leaves that you find. Now you might wonder, what else do you need? Okay, are you going to need something else other than just planting these berries? Well, the only berries that are going to need some kind of support probably are the raspberries and the blackberries. Now, there's lots and lots of different information about different types of supports to use on the berries, and there's no one way to do it. It's whatever works best in your situation, in your home garden. So you can look up all these different kinds and just do whatever's best for you. You don't have to do it the way I did it. You don't have to do it the way your neighbor did it. You can do whatever works for you in your situation. And here's a couple examples. There's my Marion berries. I have a normal 2-wire system, but here's my neighbor's. She has a cattle panel. She put it in a hoop, and she planted her blackberries. Those are brand new. She just planted them this year when I took the picture, and she's going to grow hers up over the panel. So see, depends on your situation, whatever you want. So look up information if you need to put up a type of structure and do what's best for you. I made it 7:49. Wow, I made it. So I guess it's time for questions, Hope.
You
I
did one
know
heck of a job. Let me
that was
tell
a
you,
lot.
you talked fast. I'm glad I wasn't trying to take notes because I would not have been able to write fast enough. But
I
we
know,
have
and
all
I
of these
apologize.
publications.
I apologize for that.
Oh, no,
I
no,
probably
no.
should have used a different talk instead of this one, which takes so long.
No, this was fine. And we have these all of these documents, all of these publications. So I'm just going to download. I don't have blackberries, but I'm going to download the publications for the strawberries, the raspberries, and the blueberries.
There,
And
I'll stop sharing there.
I think that will definitely help. I'm going to jump right into the questions here.
Okay.
Um, so here, the first one from Jory. Can you propagate strawberry plants from existing plants to sort of bypass that 3 to 5 year lifespan, or do they have to be entirely replaced?
You can, but there's a problem with that. It's recommended that you buy disease-free plants because if the mother plant has some type of problem, the baby's going to have it too. It's just the way it does. So if if you had, can't think of one off the top of my head, but it's not a good idea. I mean, if you really, really want to do that and you think your plants are super, super healthy, I'm not going to tell you not to do that. But in reality, it's better to start with certified disease-free plants.
Okay, that's valid. Here from Dion, my strawberries tend to be tart even in full sun in a warm location. Could water or soil impact sweetness?
It could, but different varieties definitely are, some varieties are sweeter than the other varieties. And weather is, it's amazing. It's a big factor in it too. If we have a really cool spring, right when the berries are kind of starting to develop or just getting ready to turn red, they don't seem to be as sweet. And now she says she has it in a warm area. It might be a warm area of her yard, but it might not be a warm spring or early summer.
Sure.
So it's not it so it could be the sunshine, it could be, it most likely is the weather or the type of berry.
Okay. All right. You mentioned longevity for different berries. Does that include the original plant plus its offspring or just the original plant? So this is enough. Well, oh, I thought it was strawberries. It's not. In other words, do we need to clear the entire raspberry row at some point or just continue to take out the old?
Oh, just continue to take out the old as long as all the new plants you have every year are healthy and they're still producing. Uh, maybe after 15, 20 years, they'll stop producing quite as much. And then you'll know they've outlived their life. But as
Yeah.
long as they're still producing a lot and they're healthy, no, don't worry about taking them out.
Excellent, excellent. So here's a blueberry question. If I remove the flower buds from my blueberry in year 2 or later, since I didn't remove them in year 1, will it improve future yield?
Probably not. It's the first year that is so important for the blueberries. Now, having said that, she's probably going to get a fine crop anyway. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. I mean,
Okay.
I did, I said that's very important, but hey, you didn't do it. I had some that I didn't do it to. Yeah, maybe I wouldn't, maybe they didn't produce quite as many, but it's okay. Don't worry.
Yeah. Well, probably by
Have,
year
have,
3.
have fun, enjoy what you have, and don't let it bother you.
Very good. Okay, and here Charles wants to know, are there self-supporting raspberries that do not have viruses?
Okay, self-supporting. I, one thing that I didn't talk about, and I should have there, that picture of the raspberry in a container was called raspberry shortcake. And those are specifically made for containers, and they're specifically also made so that you don't have to have supports with them. I don't know a lot about them because the universities haven't done a lot of research on them yet. And if anybody does grow those raspberry shortcakes, I'd really like to know about them. I would appreciate them letting me know. But as far as them being disease resistant, I doubt it. I don't think there's anything out there that is completely disease resistant about anything. But if he does want a non-supporting raspberry, those strawberry shortcakes are pretty good.
Okay.
Um, I can tell you, my brother just moved to Grants Pass, and then the property he bought had a whole row of those raspberry shortcakes, and they're still eating them right now. And they really are tasty. I don't know if it's because Grants Pass is warmer than us or not,
Yeah.
but yeah, they're good.
Okay. And Jackie says there were many reports of a very poor raspberry harvest this year. Were you aware of that?
No, actually, I wasn't. Um,
Okay.
what I did hear about was small raspberries. I heard there were several people on the client that, questions for the master gardeners that said their raspberries were really small this year.
Oh,
But
interesting.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear of anybody saying that it wasn't a good crop.
Okay. Okay. And Dion wants to know, would fresh chicken manure be okay for blueberries if it were applied in the fall?
No, two things. One thing, you don't want to apply fresh at all.
Okay.
Um, I know she's talking about applying it in the fall, but no, it's going to leach down, and the pH or the salts in that manure is going to affect the roots, infect the plants.
Okay.
Sorry, you'll have
Just
to use it on something else.
don't do it at all. Okay.
Mm.
And Katie says she moved into a house with raspberries. I think they're summer bearing since they only had one crop this past year. I removed the dead canes, but the ones left are not 6 feet tall.
Um, some of them, wow. Um, they might, some, she just moved in, so this is her first year of noticing them, huh?
Yeah.
I wonder, maybe they didn't, they probably didn't get fertilized enough. So they probably just didn't grow enough. Maybe they didn't have enough water. Maybe they didn't have enough. I don't know what time of the year that she moved in, whether she moved in during the time that, or did she water them or did she fertilize them? Maybe the past years where the other owners didn't quite take as good a care of them. Because if they have enough water and they have enough fertilizer and nutrients, they should have grown taller. They should at least be 5 feet tall, at
Okay.
least 5 feet tall.
Okay. But at this point, all you can do is wait until next year.
She doesn't need yeah, right,
Yeah.
right. Wait and see. And if they're, don't top them if they're short already. They'll be fine.
Okay. Um, and Holly asks, is blueberry scorch a problem in Oregon and does it persist in the soil?
It is a problem, and no, it does not exist. It does not in the soil. Blueberry scorch. I thought she was talking about shock. Um, Yes, it does persist in the soil. Actually, it persists in the plant. Oh, gosh, that's a great question. I don't think it's in the soil, but I do know that if you do have scorch, there's a difference between scorch and shock. They look the same to begin with, but then they look different as it progresses. If you have scorch and the pole plant turns black, you are to remove that plant completely. And I would imagine it's probably a good idea. That is a great question. Isn't that something? I Thank you for that question because I'm going to look that up. I don't know if it's in the soil. I beg your pardon that I don't know the answer to that, but I'm really glad that she asked that because now I need to find out. I do know you have to get rid of the plant completely.
Okay.
Um, Tell her to send a question into the Master Gardeners on Monday in 2 weeks when I'm on the phones, and I will find that answer for her before.
Okay.
So tell
Holly,
her
you
that
got
this
that?
question's for Jay. So
Okay. Jeff wants to know if I have high bush blueberries that are good producers but have not been pruned, should I take out the oldest, thickest wood, even if it's the majority of the plant?
it's the longer that plant goes without being pruned, the less and less berry he's going to get, and the smaller the berries are going to get. Start by taking out maybe just one older cane. If he takes out one older cane this coming, winter, um, look and he'll be surprised at how many new canes he has growing.
Oh, okay.
Most of the blueberries will grow new canes up from the bottom, and that's what you want. So when you cut out the old one, it stimulates the plant to grow more. So we have a blueberry pruning video that's on the Clackamas County Master Gardener's site if he wants to look at that and
Okay.
look at it and see what
Um,
it is.
Elson asks, do the blueberry tips apply to haskcaps and huckleberry?
Not huckleberries. Huckleberries don't need much pruning. For some reason, they are what we call huckleberries is actually a native blueberry, believe it or not. A true huckleberry is not a Vecinia vex. It's not the same
Okay.
genus as a blueberry. I know that it's so confusing. They have real huckleberries back east, but ours, what we call a huckleberry, is actually a native blueberry. And they don't want to be pruned like a blueberry.
Okay. And another huckleberry question is, what pH is needed for Western red huckleberries?
Huckleberries do need a low pH. They
Okay,
do.
so they're
That's
like
why they like
blueberry.
to grow, under, they grow under the types of trees and things. They grow with the soils a little lower in pH.
Okay, and here's somebody, Katie wants to know, can you recommend a brand for pH testing and where to get it?
Um, no, I can't. There's so many different ones out there. I know the home, um, I would ask at the nursery. I think the people that works at the nurseries, even if you happen to go to Portland Nursery, ask Claudia Groff. I'm sure she knows which one is best. The Clackamas County Master Gardeners do free soil pH testing 3 times a year. We do it in May and March and October, but uh, I don't know what home ones are the best. Sorry.
Yeah, oh, fair enough. Okay, and Sally wants to know, could I replant my 2-year-old blueberries and start them off better, pH and all?
Oh, yeah, blueberries transplant really well. October, November are the best months to transplant. So yeah, if you have another area that you think is really, really good and you have it, set up with the pH just right, yeah, go ahead and transplant them. Prune them down a little bit and dig up as much roots as you can, and they'll do really good.
Okay, and here our final question is, do you recommend coffee grounds to lower the pH of blueberries?
I love
I
that
know the answer
question.
to that one.
You do, and most of the people. Um, Coffee grounds do not have a low pH. Coffee grounds have a pH of about 6. Um, I know people think that coffee grounds, because coffee is acidic, that the coffee grounds are going to be acidic. Once the coffee is brewed, the coffee grounds are not. It's recommended that your coffee grounds go in your compost instead, but not more than 20% by volume. So
In the compost.
in the compost.
Now you
Yeah.
could pour your coffee on your blueberry plants, but probably, probably we
Probably
won't do
could.
that.
I'd wake them up, wouldn't it?
Okay, Jane, that is all the questions, and this has been a terrific presentation, and I think everybody learned a lot, and we know to go, because we can't write fast enough, we know to go to those publications, and then we can start underlining and highlighting.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you asking me to talk to you. I appreciate it.
Yes,
Thank you.
this has been great. Thanks so much. And you're off now. We're going to continue with our for the Washington County Master Gardeners, we're going to continue with our chapter meeting now. Thanks a
Okay.
lot.
Thank you. Bye-bye.